Hello and welcome to the History Crew channel. Please remember to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel as you will receive notification on important updates in the future. The following video serves as part 4 in this series, which is topic 5 of your syllabus. The coming of democracy in South Africa. Thus far, you would have already realized that the negotiations were not going on smoothly. As stated in the previous lessons, the process of negotiations was not easy. The major role players, which were the ANC and the NP, could not come to an agreement regarding the drawing up of the interim constitution. The Convention for a Democratic South Africa had broken down by early 1992, and tensions in the country were at an all-time high. Within the NP itself, there were lots of internal problems as not all members agreed to negotiations with the enemy. Some National Party members felt that de Klerk was not strong enough in dealing with Mandela. There was also quite a few members of the National Party, who resigned and joined the Conservative Party. This party consisted of Afrikaners, who were opposed to the negotiations. With their increasing popularity, the Conservative Party began to challenge the dominance of the National Party. This split of the Afrikaner community would also become an obstacle on the road to successful and peaceful negotiations. In early 1992, the NP under F.W. de Klerk lost a by-election to the Conservative Party. The CP then demanded for a general election to take place, confident that they would win and defeat the NP in a national election. You must take note that if the Conservative Party won in a national election, there would be very little possibility that they would allow for the process of negotiations to continue. Some historians may even argue that the Conservative Party would then try to revive apartheid and maintain white dominance in South Africa, ending all chances for a democratic South Africa. F.W. de Klerk, however, refused this challenge, but instead called for a referendum on the process of elections. Only whites would take part in this referendum, because de Klerk wanted to know from the white population as to how they feel about the process of negotiations. They would essentially have to vote yes or no, with regards to the negotiation process. Majority of the whites who registered for this whites-only referendum voted in favor of continuing with the process of negotiations. This was a crushing defeat for the CP as well as the right wing in general, and de Klerk now felt more confident to continue with the process of negotiations and achieving constitutional reforms. The victorious outcome of the referendum gave de Klerk the power to continue with the negotiation process. The negotiations began again in May 2nd, and the major role players, which were the ANC and the NP, tried to resolve the problems which they had from the Convention for a Democratic South Africa. They would agree to opening negotiations again, in order to draw up the interim constitution for a new democratic South Africa. This would become known as the Second Convention for a Democratic South Africa, but it did not go as planned at all and failed too. Yet again, the process of negotiations had stalled once more, and was yet another obstacle on the road to democracy. So why did the Second Convention for a Democratic South Africa fail, almost as soon as it started? Firstly, there were more major areas of disagreement regarding the interim constitution. The ANC wanted a system of majority rule, because they were confident that they would win the elections. Majority rule would mean that the party who won the majority of votes after a national election would completely dominate in parliament, and the ANC assumed that it would be them who did so. The NP, however, wanted power sharing because they did not want to lose complete power. Power sharing would mean that Parliament would consist of all parties who contested the elections, especially those who were present at the Convention for a Democratic South Africa. The NP wanted some form of a non-racial government. The process was then further complicated because some allies of the ANC wanted to walk out and threatened rolling mass action in the country. Negotiations were now deadlocked, because neither side was willing to back down on their demands. This would be yet another obstacle on the road to democracy. Secondly, the NP was calling for the MK to be completely disbanded, which the ANC did not agree to. The ANC in return wanted a neutral broadcasting body because they felt that the SABC could not be trusted to report events fairly. Thirdly, whilst all of this was going on at the table, the violence in the country was growing out of control. It was alleged that the members of the NP-led government and the police were secretly assisting the IFP by providing money and weapons to fight against the ANC. This third force was hoping to destabilize the country by instigating violence between the ANC and IFP and to also wreck the negotiations. The worst incidences of violence in the 1990s occurred when IFP mineworkers living in hostels carried out two separate deadly massacres on people living in Sebokeng and Boipetong using pangas and guns. The attack on Boipetong would cause Mandela to publicly accuse the IFP and de Klerk, and then walk out of negotiations in anger. When Mandela walked out, the Second Convention for a Democratic South Africa essentially came to an end. Do not forget that they only just started with negotiations in May, and now in June, it was all over. The third incident of violence which threatened to destroy negotiations and the country, occurred in September 1992, when unarmed ANC protesters were attacked by soldiers in Bisho, which was in Ciskei. The ANC protesters were calling for Ciskei to be integrated back into South Africa again, and for the end of the homelands or Bantustans. The leader of Ciskei was opposed to this. This too was significant, because unless all the homelands supported the negotiating process, South Africa would never be truly whole again. 1992 was proving to be a year of chaos, allegations and disruption. To avoid any further complicity and under intense pressure to end the violence, de Klerk then took some action. Do not forget that he is still the president of South Africa during this period. Certain ministers in his government were then demoted. He also appointed two commissions under Justice Harms and Justice Goldstone, to investigate the violence, which confirmed the South African Security Forces' involvement in promoting violence and that IFP supporters were indeed responsible for the massacres with their help. He also set up the National Peace Accords, which was signed by 24 organizations, as a commitment to peace and negotiations. Despite these efforts by the leaders at the negotiating table, the violence still continued around the country. Mandela decided to call of the rolling mass action in the country and then made an offer to de Klerk, that negotiations would continue if de Klerk, as president of the country at the time, give the order for the hostels to be fenced off and to also order the banning of the carrying of traditional weapons. Mandela was attempting to stop any further attacks on ANC supporters by the IFP, but this was angrily opposed by the IFP leadership, who argued that it was prejudiced against the Zulu nation and that it was the right of the Zulu to carry their traditional weapons. And thus, as was stated earlier, the second sitting of the Convention for a Democratic South Africa failed due to all the disagreements, complications and violence. This would continue to push the ANC and IFP further apart, which would be another obstacle on the road to democracy. In conclusion with this video, let us now complete a recap of some key aspects. Firstly, there is the internal conflict within the NP, and the NP is losing support to the Conservative Party. Number 2, the CP challenges the NP to hold a national general election. Thirdly, de Klerk refuses, but instead holds a whites-only referendum. Number 4, the majority of the registered white voters agree that the negotiations should continue. Number 5, the Second Convention for a Democratic South Africa officially begins again on the 2nd of May 1992. Number 6, there are immediately many challenges, which were the issue of power and control, disagreements on MK and the SABC, and the ongoing violence in the townships. Number 7, de Klerk under pressure takes action. Authorizes two commissions to investigate the violence, certain of his cabinet were demoted, and he also sets up the National Peace Accords. Number 8, the Second Convention for a Democratic South Africa breaks down in June 1992. Thank you for watching this video, and please stay tuned to the History Crew channel for more videos on this topic.